All right. Okay, here we go. Hey, everybody. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Okay, let's share the screens. Have we got everybody? We got 50. Okay, perfect. Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Excellent. Oh, hey, Zoe. You've joined the class. Welcome. But technical difficulties. I don't know what was going on with my internet there. And then I tried to do a Wi-Fi hotspot, which wasn't working at first. Now it's working. So we'll just have to do the class this way. So where were we? Yes, I saw that, Zoe. I haven't had a chance to get back to you about that message, but I will right after class. So the agenda for today is we've got to finish off slides for the discussion we were having over the hard problem. So what was I doing? Oh, yes, I was sharing my screen. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. Oh, hi, Toots. What you doing over there? My dog has come to join us. All right, now, boopy-doopy-doo. Iman's here. Let's let him in. Let's, oh my God, my stupid slow computer. Let's see, where were we? Ah, right. Well, I think we ended right after this slide, so this is good enough. The first option when it comes to the hard problem, remember, the hard problem is due to David Chalmers, who famously introduced it at the first annual, it's like it's not an annual, actually, it's a biannual conference in Tucson, Arizona on consciousness. All kinds of interesting figures make appearances there. I've always wanted to go myself. One day, perhaps I will. But Chalmers introduced this distinction between the easy and the hard problem. If you recall, easy problems are the things that we can tackle with the tools of the cognitive sciences. So brain scans, behavioral studies, stuff like that. The hard problem is really to do with subjectivity. How do we explain subjective consciousness? Chalmers himself does this with a kind of property dualism, but there are other answers. Last time we saw that some people think we won't be able to solve the hard problem. You know, we've got like thinkers like Roger Penrose, Stuart Hameroff, who think that the mind is not a computational system, and we won't be able to figure out how it works. Would a question of the soul be an example of a hard problem? I mean, kind of, yeah, it's very related to that because, I mean, think about it. That's how Descartes explained everything that humans were able to do that was different from animals, which he saw as mere machines, right? We have souls, we have free will, consciousness, creativity, morality, and this was all due to a soul. And modern day answers to the hard problem, some of them are also dualist, right? Some of them are substance dualists. Popper and Eccles, for example, are kind of dualists in that sense, I think. Chalmers himself, of course, is a dual aspect theorist. So yeah, we can either not solve the hard problem, or we can solve it, but with a really big rethink of, you know, our fundamental understanding of the universe. Maybe information has two aspects, like Chalmers says. Maybe there's a physical aspect and informational aspect. But here we get into worries about panpsychism, right? So, I mean, some of you may be sympathetic to option number 2. I don't know how I feel about it. I do think we should try and solve the hard problem if there is one. And I'm not sure that there actually is a hard problem, as we'll see in a moment. Option number 3. So option number 1, we can't solve the hard problem. Option number 2, we should try and solve it. Option number 3, forget about the hard problem. Let's look at the easy problems. The hard problem could be, impossible to solve, or it may not be. We might be able to solve it, but either way, we're not in any sort of position to solve it right now. So let's keep focusing on the easy problems, right? One of the things that we could do here, if we wanted to continue focusing on the easy problems, is to study the neural correlates of consciousness. Because remember, trying to solve the hard problem would amount to giving an explanation of how a physical brain, a meat machine in your head, can produce a subjective experience. And how can we explain this subjectivity with the tools of the cognitive sciences, which are objective? Maybe one thing we can do is identify the neural correlates of consciousness. What events in the brain correlate with which elements of our conscious experience, right? And I think we've had some success at this, obviously. I mean, we are pretty good at identifying functional areas of the brain, right? We've known about different functional areas of the brain for a long time. In the 19th century, for example, Corbini and Brodmann identified different areas on the surface of the cortex, and he differentiated these areas based on cytoarchitecture. Basically, what kinds of neurons, how are they organized? We still call these Brodmann's areas, and they actually correspond to certain different functional systems on the surface of the cortex. So we've been doing this for a while, and now we have even better tools. Now we have functional neuromagnetic imaging, for example, which allows us to see what's happening in the brain while the brain is doing something, while it's actually doing a task, right? You've seen these, I'm sure, in science documentaries and movies and stuff. Functional magnetic resonance imaging is when we place somebody into a machine that generates a really powerful magnetic field. Now, the way it works is that oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood disrupt magnetic fields differently. So we can use this. It's called the BOLD signal, the blood oxygen level dependent signal. We can actually use this to see which areas of the brain more blood is flowing to. And the assumption is that those are areas of the brain that are more active in a given task. So once we take a baseline reading, then we can see what other areas of the brain are doing what. Maybe I get you to read something, maybe I get you to imagine something, and we see what your brain does. So we can do this kind of thing, nowadays. Drew, go ahead.
I was watching a really cool YouTube video on, it was some guy who was explaining neuron mapping. And so there's a new technology where they're mapping neurons. They don't have it like fully because there's too many neural connections in the brain to do that yet.
Yeah.
But one of the theories that they were proposing was if we are able to accurately map the brain and all of the neural connections in the brain and see how they fire as a regular brain, would we be able to recreate a human consciousness?
That's the question, right? I mean,
yeah.
That kind of reminds me of the zombies that we were talking about, right? Previously. Imagine, let's say I know all of my connections in my brain. So I know the complete structure of my brain, and then I decide to build another one. Maybe I've got some kind of 3D printer that prints brains, or maybe I can grow one in a jar or something. So I grow my brain. Would it be conscious? Right? It's a fun little thought experiment. The Reanimated. Is that a show? That must be some science fiction, Zoe, right? Oh, okay. Nice. Yeah, the undead. See, yeah. So would my brain be philosophically undead, right? A philosophical zombie, maybe. The interesting thing about mapping neural connections, yeah, we are getting good at that too. We have a technique called diffusion tensor imaging. You may have seen pictures of this. I'll try to find some to share on the Discord after class, but they're very neat looking images. But what they represent is how information is flowing, neurons connecting where and doing what. Really cool stuff. So that's one example of something we could do to try and tackle the easy problem. And maybe if we identify some of those neural correlates of consciousness, we might get a better understanding of how this all works, right? But the fourth option is, of course, that there is no hard problem at all. We've been kidding ourselves about this. So that's what O'Hara and Scott say. There's no hard problem because we know how to address the easy problems. And we've been addressing the easy problems, this entire time, really. So we should start with those. And once we have more solutions to the easy problems, that's going to change how we understand the hard problem. So we shouldn't try to solve the hard problem now. It's premature. We should still continue to solve the easy problems until we have a comprehensive enough understanding that we can then start to explain the hard problem. And finally, a solution to the hard problem would only be useful if we can recognize it as a solution to the hard problem. We couldn't recognize such a solution now if we wanted to, O'Hara and Scott say, because the hard problem isn't well enough understood. And I think there's something to this. We can see just in the thought experiments that we did last time, how difficult it is to get our intuitions in order when it comes to this stuff. And that we all don't necessarily agree on how to approach the hard problem, or even perhaps what the questions that we need to answer are, right? So I like this approach personally, but you might find yourself more sympathetic to any of the other approaches. That's fine. Oh, slow computer. So let's go back to Dan Dennett, who I always think of as the force of reason here when we talk about consciousness. Yeah, this is the problem. And this is why we should solve. I think this is another reason science without explanation is magic. Exactly. We want to solve the problem. We want to solve the hard problem. If we try to do that without a good understanding of the solutions to the easy problems, then our explanations are going to be lacking, right? Like the quantum consciousness stuff is kind of like this for me. It sounds really sexy, quantum consciousness. Wow, that's really cool. That's nifty. But, we don't understand how quantum physics works completely yet. So, yeah, it doesn't really work as a solution to the problem of consciousness. Dennett here likens Chalmers's view of the hard problem to a vitalist. And you may remember this Elan Vital, vital spirit, that I was talking about previously. Phenomenal consciousness may be like this term, Elan Vital. We don't need it. We didn't need this to explain life, right? We thought that we needed this idea of a vital spirit to explain how things are alive. But we understand reproduction and metabolism and growth now, right? So we don't need Elan Vital. So imagine if you just switch Chalmers's position to that of a vitalist. A vitalist would say, but even after we explain reproduction and metabolism and growth, those are the easy problems of life, the hard problem of life would remain. Well, Dennett asks, would it really? He doesn't think so. He thinks that the hard problem is actually a theorist's illusion. That's what he says here. Quote, a theorist's illusion, something inviting therapy, not a real problem to be solved with revolutionary new science. So Dennett actually thinks that we are misconstruing consciousness. It seems as though there is actual phenomenology, and what we need to do is explain how it comes to seem this way. And I know what some of you might be thinking here. we may understand how, but how does it come to, well, that, yeah, Ben, that's a good point. That's the origin of life, surely. And maybe if there is a hard problem of life, that's it, right? Abiogenesis. How did life come to be, right? That is a hard problem. That's a tricky problem, but I think that we could solve. We're probably actually closer to solving that problem than we are understanding how consciousness works. I would venture to guess. The class started a little bit later, Elijah, because oh yeah, Zoom was being funny. My internet was being silly. I'm not sure what's happening. I think there might be some internet issues in town. Maybe the cold weather or I'm not sure. I apologize for the technical difficulties. But yeah, well, yeah, that's exactly right. I think that the internet's being overwhelmed by the truckers. I haven't seen any yet.
My God, the truckers. I live in Brockville, but my boyfriend lives in Ottawa, so I'm doing it in Ottawa right now. But we literally got on the highway and we saw like the first 3 trucks. So like I would have been late to class if I didn't we left like 5 minutes later.
Yeah. Like I'm trying not to, I live downtown and I've got stuff to do, which sucks because yeah, it's not going to be nearly as busy as the truckers think it is, but it's still going to be busy and disruptive, I think. And
yeah,
I'm like, man, I've got things to do. Like
every single overpass has people.
I think there might be more people going out to watch than actual. I mean, the Ottawa police said estimated 1,000 to 2,000 people, I think. Extra people in the city, which is not that much. I mean, yeah, but we'll see. I mean, I just don't want any crazy radical stuff to happen.
Yeah.
So, but this thing from Dennett, this can be a little this tricks people up. This sometimes still tricks me up. We misconstrue consciousness. It just seems as though there is actual phenomenology. Like phenomenology is mere appearance on some interpretations. So my mere appearance is just a mere appearance. It's a mere appearance of a mere appearance. I mean, do you see what some people might find tricky about the way this is put? Drew, go ahead.
Is he kind of like talking about not referencing Descartes, but like similar to Descartes, where like we're being tricked by a demon almost, but the demon is our brain?
That's an interesting way to
kind of like saying that like our brain is making us think that there's something more when there really isn't. It's just our brain.
I mean, kind of, yeah, that's kind of what he's saying, is that consciousness is an illusion. It's not an illusion in the sense that it's fake or unreal, but it's an illusion in the sense that it doesn't work the way it seems to work to us.
Yeah.
That's
what he's been saying before.
Yeah. And that's why Dennett is a very clear writer, but the ideas he deals with are difficult, like this. So that's why Dennett can kind of trick you up, but he's very clear. And if you want to read more, like, I highly recommend it. He's good, Yeah. And yeah, I agree with this sentiment right here. Everything is hard until we try it and it becomes easy. And yeah, I mean, we're so much closer to understanding more about the brain than we were 100 years ago. I remember in one of my classes in grad school, Professor Andrew Brooke, who himself is he's a heavy hitter in this field. He's writing a book on consciousness right now, or maybe he's finally finished it. I'm not sure. But anyway, consciousness is his jam, and he's really super smart and really excellent at studying it. He said to us in this class, maybe in another 100 or 200 years, if we still haven't figured this out, maybe then it's time to look at some radically different alternative. But we need to keep at it, right? Yeah, consciousness, like time, is an illusion of perspective. Yeah, I mean, consciousness, I mean, if you think of yeah. Yeah, if you once we all go back to normal, if you guys ever get the chance to say hi to Professor Brooke, you should. Really great prof. And he started the cognitive science program at Carleton, which is what I graduated from. So, you know, like it's really cool. It's really cool to be part of that, you know. So yeah, if consciousness, I mean, consciousness as an illusion, you want to probably think here of something like Buddhism, right? Where Buddhism says that the self is an illusion. Consciousness is kind of like that. It's not that it doesn't exist, it's that it doesn't work the way we think it does, right? And we need to explain that. So those are 4 approaches. Oh yeah, Ben, cheers. Yeah, Zoe did just join the class. So I've had a couple other students joining classes late, and I am making arrangements with them to be able to catch up before they submit work. You know, people who have been in my classes before, Zoe, Ben, you know that I'm not really crazy when it comes to late marks. Like I tend to be pretty accommodating. I tend to work with people if there's legit stuff going on, and if you keep open lines of communication with me, then, you know, whether you've just joined the class or you're sick or something crazy happens, you never know, life's crazy, just let me know. And I'm very accommodating. So that's it for this stuff. Now we need to go to the next slide. But first, Elijah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a slightly unrelated question. This has to do with Block and consciousness.
Okay.
And there's one line that I can't like wrap my head around. I was wondering if you could explain it. It's, does what it is like to have an experience include whatever cognitive processes underlie our ability to report the experience?
Yeah, okay. I think I can clarify that. So remember that Block has this distinction that he makes between phenomenal consciousness, which is what we've been talking about, the what it's like aspect, and access consciousness, which is when information is available in reasoning, planning, language, stuff like that. So the question that's being posed there is whether, you know, those features that Block would call access consciousness, is there something that it's like, does that have a phenomenal aspect to it, right? Some people, I think, call this cognitive phenomenology. I talked a little bit about this in my emotions class last semester. And this is the idea that, you know, there's something that it's like to think, that information processing in the human mind has a phenomenal component to it. But of course, it all depends on what you mean, and whether one is aware of it or not.
So, so that would go like, like if you're a physicalist, you would disagree with that, right? You would say, no, there is nothing that it's like to think. It's just like a chemical process, right? Or how would you? Is that
well, right? It depends, right? Like if I create some kind of artificial intelligence, we can very reasonably talk about what it's doing as thinking, right? Maybe I make a chess program. Okay, so I've got my chess program and it plays chess, and it thinks about chess. It goes through, it's computational, just like a majority of theorists believe that the human mind is. And on computationalism, cognition is thinking. That's just what it is, right? So I could say that my chess program is thinking, no problem, but there's nothing that it's like to be my chess program, right? So I would say that when it comes to a human, I have the thinky part, but I also have the something that it's like part. And I guess the question is, like, if there is something that it's like for me anyway to think, then the difference between phenomenal and access consciousness kind of disappears. On the other hand, the fact that there's nothing that it's like for my chess program to play chess, yet it still is using information to reason and plan and play chess, I could, is that access consciousness, or is that just, what is that? I don't know. I'm not, I'll be honest, I'm not sure how helpful I find Bloch's distinction, because I'm not certain whether there is something that it's like, there is a subjective element to those underlying processes in reasoning and planning and stuff. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but let's see. I'm just going to maximize my slides here, full screen. This is chapter 3 that we're starting now. For Zoe and anyone else who just joined, this textbook is not like that difficult of a read, so catching up should be not too difficult. I think this book, I would even say it's kind of a fun read. Okay, so conscious and unconscious action. Let's see, 1208, we're doing okay. Well, we've got this division between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. And this is not a new distinction, right? Early psychologists, psychophysicists like von Helmholtz talked about, unconscious inference, for example. Likewise, James has this idea of unconscious cerebration, unconscious information processing, we would say in today's terminology. And of course, you can't forget about Freud, who has his own somewhat, idiosyncratic view of the unconscious. Yeah, oh, no worries, Elijah. Yeah, I can't wait to be in person either. It's not next week, but the week after, we'll be back in person, barring any other waves of variants or any other craziness. Fingers crossed. So Freud has, an interesting view of the mind. Yeah, exactly. Like for Freud, a lot of important stuff happens in the unconscious. Unconscious is kind of where everything that the conscious mind can't deal with gets stuffed, gets repressed, but it can come back, Freud says. It can come back in the form of symbols and dreams. Symbols because the conscious mind kind of censors things with symbols, Freud theorized. This isn't really an accepted view anymore, but it's interesting. As I said earlier, like I think Freud is fine if you want to interpret art or literature or movies. Freud is actually kind of cool. It's kind of fun to do like Freudian literary analysis, and it's kind of neat. But as a theory of the mental, I don't think it really works. And if anyone wants to see what I mean, you should watch The Pervert's Guide to Cinema. That's a film presented by Slavoj Žižek, who is a very interesting fellow, and I believe directed by Sophie Fiennes. Anyway, Freudian psychoanalysis applied to films. Very good stuff. You should check it out if you want. Of course, the ancients also thought of the mind as divisible. The ancient Egyptians believed that. The ancient Hindu texts talk about that. And of course, Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, divided the soul up into different parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. Oh goodness. Yeah, Zizek is a very cool fellow. Yeah, such a Marxist. But he's like so ironic, like he'll say he's a Stalinist, like just for the lulz. Like he's such an interesting dude. Go ahead, Drew.
There's a really cool debate between him and Jordan Peterson on the debates on happiness within different systems. And
Right.
Savage he's arguing for happiness in a communist / Marxist system, whereas Peterson's arguing for it in a capitalist society. And it's really funny because Peterson starts, there's no spoilers, but Peterson starts off essentially trying to attack Marxist ideology completely, like right off the bat, talking about Communist Manifesto and everything like that. And then Slavoj Žižek really just goes off completely in another direction with his own Marxist theory that Peterson isn't really he just wasn't ready for it. It's like a 3-hour debate, but it's really, really cool.
I've seen clips. I've been meaning to watch the whole debate for a while. Not that I really have any interest in really anything that Jordan Peterson has to say. But I'm kind of a Žižek fanboy. And that was the debate where Peterson had only read the Communist Manifesto, correct? That's yeah. I mean, come on.
There's also a really funny part where he goes off to say he's not a Marxist. He says he's not a Marxist. I forget what he says. I think there's a certain term, but he follows Engels or something over Marx, which is it's really funny because it's very similar, but Peterson would only have read Marx. So yeah.
And he didn't read anything substantial. If you want to go with Marx, you need to read Capital. And Capital is this big, this thick. The Communist Manifesto is like a pamphlet. Anyway, the manifesto is, Zoe, you're right. The manifesto is I mean, that's the hook, workers of the world unite, that gets you in the door. Capital is the theory, how Marx actually thought, everything worked. Because remember, Marx is a serious economist, right? Yeah, I mean, fucking. Yeah, exactly. Zoe, that's a really good way to put it. That's a really good way to put it. A pamphlet and Capital is the movie. Elijah, I don't watch or listen to Rogan, but of course he did. And you know what? Fine, men can cry, but oh my God, Peterson is he's off the freaking deep end. I mean, is that the one where he was ranting about climate, the recent interview? There is no climate because climate is everything. I mean, I am baffled by the size of that guy's following. Yeah. Joe Rogan versus Penn. Oh, that might be interesting. I'll have to check that out. Man, if Joe Rogan just stayed in his lane, if he only talked about sports, I think I might actually be able to listen to his show. But I've had his show on, people have had it on at work, and I hear the stuff that comes out of his mouth, and I'm just what? I can't. I just can't. So anyway, let's get back to the mind. Graham Hancock with Randall Carlson. I don't know if I know any of those names. Oh, I like Paul Stamets. Yeah. Paul Stamets is awesome. I watch a lot of his talks. He's a really cool guy. He's like one of those old timey gentleman scientists. Fantastic.
The thing is, he's not an actual scientist, which is the coolest. He doesn't have any formal scientific training. He really just went off and started his own company and started developing his own research. Obviously he does research and extensive research. He has loads of patents as well.
Yeah.
But he's not a PhD or anything. I don't think.
He has a bachelor's degree, but I don't think it's in mycology even.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked in forestry for a while, if I understand. But yeah, he's one of those kinds of scientists you really don't see very often anymore. which is really cool. And his research is awesome. And his videos are cool. He posts really cool videos on his YouTube channel where he finds like nice edible mushrooms, or he grows them in his garden and he shows you how to cook them, and really cool. So yeah, Paul Stamets is awesome. Okay, consciousness. Blah. Oh, right. That's the important part I forgot to say. Right now, we talk about the conscious and the unconscious minds, but now we have different models of unconscious processing, one of which is something called the dual process model. Here's where we get to some crazy stuff, some crazy mind-blowing stuff that's going to be fun to talk about. Just think of when you perform a simple task, like I don't have a ball. I don't really have anything that I can toss up. Maybe I can toss this up and down. If I toss this up and down, well, ow, see, I'm not good at that. Or when you open a door, you reach out, grab the doorknob, open it. It seems like we're doing this when we do that. We perceive the world, and then we act on the basis of our experience. So, I see this. This is a USB speaker. I toss it in the air, slow motion, and I'm watching it, and then it comes back down, and I catch it. Or if I open the door, pretend it's a doorknob. I see the doorknob, and I reach it, turn it, open the door, right? I look, I act. That's the way it seems. And that's called the assumption of experience-based control. But is that really how it works? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe our experience is actually misleading us here. Jaegwon Kim, a very big philosopher of mind from the 20th century. I believe he just passed away with a while ago. He was an epiphenomenalist, and he says that our conscious or our experience might actually be misleading us, right? Because remember, as an epiphenomenalist, he does not think that consciousness plays a causal role. My willing to reach out and open the door isn't what causes me to reach out and open the door, right? So he says a conscious thought might cause other thoughts or actions, but this doesn't mean consciousness is the relevant factor. Maybe content is the relevant factor, right? Similarly, Shadworth Hodgson says that feelings have no causal efficacy, right? So my feeling that I'm reaching out and opening the door is not what's causing me to open the door. And Huxley, of course, same thing. He was an epiphenomenalist too. Remember that he claimed that humans are conscious automata. We're basically just conscious robots, Let's see. Sort of, yeah, sort of, Zoe. Like, I'll explain it. It's actually really kind of weird how opening a door works. It doesn't even the time. I'll clarify in a moment. Elijah had your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what does he mean by feelings don't cause anything, like your senses? Because in my other class, I actually wrote a paper on this, like the sense of proprioception, like the sense of the body. And if you don't have that sense, you don't know what your limbs are doing. So you actually wouldn't be able to open a door without looking at the door if you didn't have a sense of proprioception.
Right. You have to look at the door, yes, but it's not your conscious, it's actually not your conscious visual stream that plays a role in you actually doing the action of opening the door, is the thing. And it's really weird how this works. But it's because we actually have two different visual pathways in the brain, right? And this is why, as Zoe says here, it kind of happens at the same time, but there are actually two different information processing channels happening here. So it'll become clear in a moment, I think. Actually, just how are we for time? 12:21. Okay. So this problem is still with us, trying to explain whether consciousness actually causes anything. Max Vellman says this. He says, oh, excuse me. He says, consciousness presents a causal paradox. Viewed from a first-person perspective, consciousness appears to be necessary for most forms of complex or novel processing. But Viewed from a third-person perspective, consciousness does not appear to be necessary for any form of processing. So epiphenomenalism is a real possibility, and the mind-body problem still hasn't been solved, right? So what do we do about that? We'll see once my slides go. Okay. So we'll have studies that we do. Blackmore talks about a lot of different studies where we look at the disconnection or disassociation between what we consciously perceive and our visual motor control, our motions that we make on the basis of what we see. So in some experiments, for example, the participants have to point to a target on a screen. And just as they begin to point, like say I'm pointing, whoop, the target moves, and I've got to move it to where the target is, right? But they also have the eye tracking going on so that they can set it up so that if the eyes make a saccade, a voluntary saccade, the participants will not consciously see the displacement. Why? Well, when your eyes are tracking, this is tracking. If I watch the pen, see how my eyes are tracking this pen. They're smooth, they're moving smooth, fluid motion, tracking the pen, right? But a saccade is like quick, right to left, up, down, right, left. Those are saccades. When you make a saccade, and this is the really crazy part, there's actually no information reaching the visual cortex when you saccade. Yet it does not seem like the world just goes dark when you saccade. Your brain kind of fills in the space, right? That's why when you make the saccade, you miss the change. You don't perceive the change. Consciously, that is. Yet, the participants still readjust their arm movements and correctly point to the target's final position, even though the change occurs during a saccade, and so it's not actually consciously seen. What? Ayman, go ahead.
This is just for me, but I'm pretty sure this is sometimes referenced in like sword fighting and stuff where fighters don't necessarily see the movement of the, like they don't necessarily see the movement of the blade and their body just sort of reacts instinctively, right?
Yeah.
Because the brain just fills up where the sword will be going, where they need to parry or block, I imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it might seem like they're doing that consciously with the vision, with conscious vision, but they're actually not. Same with most sports, actually.
Would
right?
this also like kind of work like if, for example, you're walking around with your phone and you know there's going to be a door in front of you, you don't actively need to see where the handle is, you just kind of push it open?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or anything really like that. We'll go over some more examples as we go. Drew and then Donovan, go ahead.
Would you say that there's a threshold then where we go from conscious action to unconscious action? So like when we're learning something, it would be like that we are consciously, so I'm on fencing example. So when you're learning fencing, you would have to see where you think that they're going to go, and that would be a conscious action to block or parry. Whereas later on, a professional would more likely make that action unconsciously just because they've experienced and know that more.
Yeah.
Like there's a threshold almost where you go from conscious to unconscious action.
Yeah, this is something you see, like you can see this in the difference between like experts and novices. Like, oh, there's all my guitars here, right? Have you ever tried to pick up a guitar? You've never played guitar before, and you try to do like a G chord, like an open G major chord, and you're like, what? You gotta, like, your fingers are all messed up and you can't do it. But eventually get to the point where you just make the shapes without thinking, right? And that's kind of the difference. Same with novices versus experts in most domains, right? Donovan, go ahead, and then I'll get to the questions in the chat.
Okay, I just have a question because I'm not sure I understand how this like indicates that like the visual motor control and conscious perception are like divorced from each other in some way. Because to me this kind of seems like if you're doing stuff in a math class, right, and you're going through a particular method to solve a problem, and there's a step in that method that is very easy, that you're very familiar with, and that you do a lot, and like if you start, like, just if instead of writing down all your steps individually, you start skipping that one because you're already going to do it, and it just kind of gets like, it just doesn't get like, it doesn't get written down or noted, but you're still like doing it even if you don't even have to think about that. Is that being removed from your conscious train of, like, I just don't really understand like what
well, what we're talking about here specifically is visual motor control.
Well, but it's like, but the thing I'm getting at is like, it's like, because I mean, the way the human brain is structured, we're really good at tracking moving things, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of that same thing of like, you can sort of like skip steps in the process of doing something if you're really familiar with it. And does that, like, I don't know. I'm not.
Like, okay, so I would say that in a case like that, like, I always like to use the example of chess players. Like, think of a chess grandmaster playing like a bullet chess where you're going super fast. They're going from intuition. So whatever chess calculations are going on are actually probably unconscious, but the result is conscious. I would say maybe something is similar with your math problem example, perhaps, right? But as far as the action stuff goes, that will become clear in a moment. But I'm just going to go with the chat here real quick. Yeah. Yeah. Like Zoe says here. Yeah. What we're talking about that's very similar to what we're talking about here. Yeah. Muscle memory is kind of different because that's outside of the brain. But by virtue of that, I guess it counts as unconscious, kind of like reflexes are unconscious, right? So yeah. Now I want to explain how all of this is possible. Goes back to Milner and Goodale and the earlier work of Ungerleider and Mishkin in the early 80s. They argue for this functional dissociation between two different streams of vision. We have a ventral stream and a dorsal stream in the brain. Ungerleider and Mishkin called the ventral stream the what pathway and the dorsal stream the where pathway. But nowadays, we don't really use that distinction anymore. Instead, what we do, following Milner and Goodale, is we think of these streams as being for vision for action or visual motor control, fast visual motor control. That's what the dorsal stream is for. And we also have vision for perception. That's the ventral stream. And the vision for perception stream is conscious visual experience. So let's have a little look at the brain. So here's the eye. Remember, the brain is organized contralaterally, which is not shown here. But we have the dorsal and ventral system. We have the stuff from the eye, information, light comes in, goes through the optic nerves. Occipital lobe, ventral stream goes down here. Dorsal stream goes up here. There are lots of interesting experimental examples discussed by Blackmore, but the best one is a very curious phenomenon called blindsight. Let's see. So blindsight is interesting. I'm just going to hop back here for a sec. And I will make a video available when I upload this on YouTube. But blindsight is a curious condition where somebody will have some damage to their ventral stream, right, for their vision for perception. This could be in one eye or both eyes, both sides of the stream, such that the person who has blindsight does not have any conscious visual experience. But they're still able to open doors, avoid obstacles, see where things are, right? They can see even though they're blind. Thus, blindsight. How is this possible? Well, the vision for a perception stream is damaged. So there's no conscious visual experience. There's no like experience of this visual field. But your vision for action stream, which is unconscious. Nope, I'm teaching. But your vision for action stream is unconscious. So somebody with blindsight, you know, if I sit them in front of a computer screen and do an experiment where I have a moving figure, you know, and it goes up or down, right or left, they won't be able to see that, but they will answer correctly which way the object is going on the screen, thanks to their vision for action pathway. Yeah, mysteries of the mind. Yeah, I'm sure you talk about something like this in that class. Yeah, Oliver Sacks, the man who mistook his wife for a hat. Yeah, exactly right. Oh, wow, interesting. Yeah, so blindsight is very interesting and shows us how there can be a sort of dissociation between these two different streams of processing. And I'll make a video available from it's a clip from a documentary featuring V.S. Ramachandran, who's a very cool cognitive neuroscientist, and he does all kinds of interesting experiments with all kinds of people that have interesting things going on in their brain. So yeah, when Jimmy grabbed the cup, I don't know what that means. I'm a cog sci guy. I don't know. Who's Jimmy? Tell us. I don't know who that is.
It's just the professor. He just does a bunch of like, I don't know. It's
Jim Davies. Jim Davies. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
All my friends and I used to call him Jimmy and would like say stuff about it in the group chat and just like, but no one answered.
Yeah, my bad. He was on my thesis committee. Yeah. He's an interesting dude. But yeah, of course, mysteries of the mind. Yeah, this is exactly the kind of thing you talk about in a class like that. So this, Drew, is your hand up, or is it still up from before? I can't tell if you have a question.
My bad, my hand was just unconsciously up.
Oh, see, it's an evidence proof of what I'm talking about. This highlights this difference. We've got information processing for actual visual perception, and then we've got information processing for motor control. And evolutionarily speaking, this makes a lot of sense, right? If you're out there hunting and gathering and trying to survive, you want fast and accurate responses to visual stimuli, you know, because that's important for all the things you need to do. Think about if you're hunting, you got to shoot the arrow or throw the spear fast and accurately. You got to avoid danger. Got to get around the environment. So yeah, this makes sense. So the dorsal stream is modular, probably made up of little different subsystems, all self-contained, and each of them probably controls a different kind of skilled movement. And that's why it's so fast. Identifying actual objects is probably much newer, you know, in evolutionary terms. So accuracy is more important than speed when it comes to making strategic decisions and planning for the future. And because humans are so consciousness is there to solve you know, novel problems, right? So, and this is the clip, by the way, if you want to check it out later, of Ramachandran, you know, talking about the zombie in our heads. We were talking about, you know, something that there's nothing that it's like to be a zombie. Well, maybe the dorsal stream is the zombie in our head, or the ventral stream is conscious. So, and you'll see when Ramachandran explains this in this clip, right? He uses the example of driving a car, right? He's driving the car, talking to the camera, and he says, you know, of course, like I'm not even consciously aware of what's happening on the road right now. I'm talking to you, and I'm driving kind of automatically. But if something crazy happens, if a car jumps out or something, consciousness can take over, and he can consciously navigate the vehicle to deal with the danger, right? So that's the idea. And Goodale actually agrees with this. He says the visual information that the dorsal stream uses remain quite inaccessible to consciousness, while the ventral stream provides a conscious representation of the world. Same with Nancy Canwisher, who says that the neural correlates of the contents of visual awareness are represented in the ventral pathway, whereas the neural correlates of the more general purpose content independent processes are found primarily in the dorsal pathway. Very interesting. So two visual streams, one is conscious and the other is not. So think here of a tennis player or like a swordsman, or whatever kind of athlete. These tennis players serve balls crazy fast, like over 100 miles an hour. So if you're out there on the tennis court and you get the ball served that fast, there is not enough time for you to consciously calculate how to return that serve. It's probably unconscious. Our tennis player is using her Blindsight to return the serve. So we all, I mean, there's Blindsight, the condition where one has no conscious visual experience, but still has visual motor control. But then there's also Blindsight that we all have. And this is what I use to open a door, right? When I look at the door, it's my ventral stream that provides the conscious experience, but it's my dorsal stream that's providing the information that actually guides my action to grab this. So it's not look at the doorknob, move my hand consciously and grab it. That's the way it seems to us. But when we look at how the brain works, that's not what's happening. Ben,
so
go ahead.
how would this fit into physicalism? Like if consciousness is illusory, then why wouldn't this be consciousness as well, you know?
Well, it seems that I think it's kind of like we were saying on the previous slide, right? I think that consciousness is something that's a bit newer, evolutionarily speaking. And it's more for like, if a group of humans need to sit down and plan how they're going to go out hunting and gathering, or where they're going to travel with the seasons, that's something that we need consciousness for. Whereas opening doors is something that we don't really need consciousness for, but because we have it, we nonetheless have a visual experience of the door, even though that's not what's actually guiding our actions, right? And I think that's perfectly compatible with physicalism, right? So yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
Yeah, I think that does. It's just like,
okay,
because like if everything's like, because I think you could have, you know, when we talked about like the world of zombies or whatever, and they would probably be able to do most of what we would be able to do, or like what evolution like destined us to do, I guess, without consciousness. So it's just curious that like, you know, we do have consciousness, or at least that we have an illusion of consciousness.
Yeah, right. But like Dennett says, any sufficiently complicated zombie should have those same illusions, right? A complex self-monitoring zombie, which is maybe what we are. I mean, that's what Dennett thinks we are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm on, this is really interesting. So math is just our unconscious calculation visualized, kind of. I mean, if you're good at math, I suppose. There's actually a really cool documentary you can watch. It's available on YouTube. It's a few years old now, but it's called The Boy with the Incredible Brain. And it's about Daniel Tammet, who is a prodigious savant. And he does these incredible calculations that it seems that his brain is doing without Daniel having to think about it, right? So I would check out that documentary. So all right, so that's the tennis player. So what do we conclude from this? Well, if our tennis player really is using Blindsight to return the serve, then what do we conclude about the assumption of experience-based control, the idea that conscious control, I have conscious control over my actions? Well, oh my goodness, I'm yawning so much. We conclude that at least, you know, a sizable amount of the time, we are actually not in conscious control of our actions, which is kind of creepy. And this applies to everybody, not just very skilled athletes, right? I mean, think about talking, think about using language, right? Automaticity. You want a really great example of automaticity? Just try not understanding what I'm saying to you right now. right? Just try not to understand the words that I'm speaking. You can, right? Your brain automatically understands. So yeah, that's automaticity. You do not have to consciously do that. If you're learning a new language, maybe you do, but once you know the language and you're an expert, it's unconscious. Donovan, go ahead.
Actually, I think I have a pretty good personal example of this. So I am like uncannily good at catching things, but
Huh.
only if I'm not focusing on it. Like, the main thing is like if I drop something, I will react to it extremely quickly. I had a year ago, I was at a dinner party with some family friends, and I was sitting at the end of the table, and right next to me was the bottle of wine. And I was saying something, and mid-sentence I knocked it like off the table with my elbow, and in reaction I wheeled all the way around and grabbed it by the neck with my other arm without getting any of it on the carpet.
Ninja.
But like if you tell me to like catch something, there's like a large amount of panic and a 50% chance that it'll like bounce off of my hand.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, like that's probably your unconscious, that's visual motor control. Maybe you've got a really good dorsal pathway, and maybe that's why you can like catch stuff very well. But you're definitely not doing like your example shows. You're right. When you focus on it, you kind of lose it. So yeah, it's a good example of conscious of unconscious control, right? Radhika, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Go ahead.
Yes, you're saying my name correctly. Actually, I had a question about, do reflexes work in the same way?
Yeah. In a similar way, because some reflexes are completely outside of the brain. There are some reflexes that are just sort of implemented by the local nervous system, like when a doctor hits your knee with a hammer,
Okay.
or if you pull your hand away from a hot stove, right? You pull your hand away before the pain signals actually reach your brain. So that's unconscious, but it's not unconscious like the dorsal stream, because that's in your brain, whereas these unconscious pathways are rather throughout the body, but it is similar.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's saying bruh and yeet in sentences is automaticity. That's a good example. I always feel this way with people who say like a lot. Like, people who say but I don't know. So yeah, this is for all of us: opening doors, catching wine bottles, fighting with swords, playing tennis, doesn't matter. So there's this dissociation we have between vision for action and vision for perception. And this helps us to navigate our environment, contend with what happens in that environment, and plan for new situations, right? So the zombie debate is a real debate, and it's more complicated than it sounds. It's not just thought experiments. It could be that we have conscious processes in the brain and unconscious processes, zombies in our brain, that actually work in concert with the conscious processes. So that's really crazy stuff. That's really neat. So let's get back to this question of whether there is a causal role for consciousness. We should just have a few minutes left. It's 12:47 according to my phone. So I think we can get a few more slides out of the way. So there are some theories that, unlike epiphenomenalism, posit that there's a causal role for consciousness to play, right? Substance dualists, of course, think that mind and matter are different substances. And even though Descartes didn't really explain very well how these substances are supposed to interact, he thought it took place in the pineal gland, but he didn't explain how. But he did believe that mental events can cause brain events. And the idea that mind and matter interact and can actually affect one another is known as interactionism. So Descartes was an interactionist. There are other interactionists too, like William Benjamin Carpenter. He wrote a book called Principles of Mental Psychology, and he describes a different form of interactionism in his book, where he says information from the environment can cause physiological activity, which he says excites something called sensational consciousness. And here's where it gets a bit weird. Consciousness, which includes everything from sensations, ideas, emotions, volitions, as long as they're intense enough, liberates the quote unquote nerve force, which quote unquote charges the relevant areas of the brain. So, okay, interesting, but he couldn't explain how physical changes translate to psychical changes and vice versa. So it's an interesting idea, but again, he doesn't really explain how it works. He just uses these kind of nebulous, right? What is nerve force? No one knows. And Karl Popper and John Eccles in the late 70s proposed a kind of dualist interactionism where, quote, self-conscious mind interacts with the, quote, liaison areas of the dominant cerebral hemisphere. They thought that these areas included linguistic areas like, well, I'll just read areas like, quote, which have linguistic and ideational performance or which have polymodal inputs. So we're talking Brodmann's areas 39 and 40 in the prefrontal lobes here. These are all areas of the brain that are right about here, in case you're curious. So they think there's a two-way constant interaction between the mind and the brain. The mind integrates, it reads and integrates physical events into the brain in a unified experience, and it acts on the brain. It can cause activity, for example, in motor pyramidal cells in the motor cortex, causing us to move. And that's how Popper and Eccles supposed that motor activity, physical action happens, right? So, bugs. Liebe also has this idea of a conscious mental field, right? A mental field that sort of in one way goes both directions, serves as a mediator between the physical activities of nerve cells and the emergence of subjective experience, but also possesses, quote, a causal ability to affect or alter some neuronal functions. So this is how Liebe wanted to account for free will. And this is interesting because Liebe is, he's like a free will theorist. He studies free will neurologically. And we're going to talk about some of those studies later on in the class. Some of his studies with EEGs. So let's see. We can do one or two more slides. So the difference between actions being carried out consciously or unconsciously is pretty straightforward on these theories. Whatever theory you go with, Liebe's, Popper's, and Eccles, whatever, conscious actions cause the brain to carry out actions by interacting with it somehow, thus interactionism. And unconscious actions, the brain processes just kind of act along, and there's no interference from the conscious mind in the brain. The brain is just kind of on automatic pilot for unconscious actions. So they theorize. But there's a problem, right? The problem is, how do the physical and non-physical interact? So we've still got the same old problems of dualism here. Popper and Eccles do not have an answer to this. They've suggested in subsequent work, or Eccles has rather, that mental events and experience are composed of maybe certain kinds of elementary particles called psychons. Maybe psychons interact with the dendrites in the brain. But we've no evidence for this, right? This is just a theoretical proposal which we have no empirical support for. So kind of as some people in the chat mentioned earlier, where physical descriptions are concerned, conscious minds kind of sound like magic. So that's why most philosophers and scientists nowadays reject dualism. right? And even if they are dualists, they tend not to be substance dualists. They'll be property dualists, like David Chalmers. People, dualists still exist, but they're more like David Chalmers than Rene Descartes. And you also have some that are maybe like William James, right? Who's a neutral monist. Although I'm not really sure what the difference is between James's neutral monism and dual aspect theory. That's something that might make a good essay or critical response. All right. I think I'm going to leave it there because I am using my data for this because my internet is all screwy. So yeah, we've made it pretty good way through these slides. And it's almost the weekend. So yeah, we'll pick this up. We'll try to finish this chapter on Monday. Remember later tonight, the first reading response is due. So yeah, that's it. I'll let you all go. Have a good weekend. I'll post these slides when my internet starts working again. So take care, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Thanks for the lecture. Have a nice day.
You too. See you next time.
Have a good weekend. See ya.
Bye. All right, Katie.
Okay.
Here, I'm just going to stop recording, and then we can have our meeting. So for anyone who's watching on the internet, bye for now.